Hey yo, this is a Tuesday toy photography tutorial, and we are going to be editing this picture into this picture. Let's go. Tutorials over editing is definitely a top request, so today we're going to do that. We have the hyperreal Darth Vader and Clone Wars Mace Windu. So they're not the same scale. Darth Vader is obviously bigger, but I was going for that. I wanted him to look bigger just for the fun of it. Also, the background that I'm using is from the Flat World. I think this is like the second shot I use with it, and I really like it. This side is red, the other side is blue. So I'm starting off with making the lightsaber. I have a tutorial on that in another video, but just to keep things nice and slow, I'm doing it step by step. I got the white line to make the saber, and then I make 6 copies of that. The top one being 200% or 200 Gaussian blur, and then each layer goes 100, 50, 40, 20, 10, and then the last or bottom layer is 4. So here I'm erasing a little bit of the saber over his hand. I don't always do this, but sometimes it just looks a little off to me, so here I'm going to clean it up some. I also combined the top 4 layers, which is this one that I'm selecting, and I set it to screen. And now we're gonna change the color to purple. So I go to hue saturation adjustments, click colorize, saturation at 100. I bring the lightness anywhere between like 30 and 50, depends on the color. And then kind of just move the bar to get a color that I like. So I liked this one, and I made a copy of that layer. So it's just the color and blur top 4 blur layers. So the bottom 2 layers, which is the 10 and 4 Gaussian blur, remain white. So that way it still shows the white, but then the blur color is what's stronger on the outside. And here, because I used the saber on the figure, I'm just kind of erasing it. Once again, I don't always erase it because you don't need to, but this time I feel like a little bit was coming out, and so I just wanted to get rid of that. So now it's just the saber. And to do that, I used content aware fill. So I just selected the blade in the image, and then I just put fill, content aware, boom, Photoshop magic. So we're not gonna go through all of Darth Vader's saber, since I just did Mace's, same process, white line, 6 copies, Gaussian blur, different levels to each. And now the difference is we're making it red. So hue saturation, colorize, 100 saturation, bring the lightness down, and red is usually 0 is like a good red. Kind of hard to see with the background, but I'm okay with that. Made a copy of that colored blur layer to make it pop. Also had set it to screen, and then I combined also with Mace's saber. I combined like all those layers for each one, and then I set it to screen. So that way it's just one whole layer with the saber set to screen. Now I'm adding a curves adjustment to kind of start messing with the lights. I usually like starting off with curves. It's probably my favorite adjustment. So I made a little S curve on the regular one. The blue I like using first to bring the highlight, which is the top right bar, down. It makes any of the whites a little yellow, bring the blues, and then on the bottom bring blues in the shadows. And then for the red, moving that top bar, bringing it down, it brings like some teal into it, so it kind of blends with that yellow, and then I boost the red a little bit. So now I added an exposure layer, and so I don't really have like a certain method as far as what comes after. I love starting with curves, and then after that it's kind of just messing around with all of them, because you can still rearrange later. So this next adjustment layer that I'm going to add is the gradient map. Definitely a favorite. This black box that you're selecting on the left is going to be the darkest parts of your image, so whatever color you choose, it becomes that color. And then on the right is the brightest parts. So it kind of looks funky right now, but I set it to soft light and it kind of blends, and then I decrease the opacity a ton and then slowly go up to kind of get a look that I'm going for. I usually start out with orange, or the teal and orange, just because like that cinematic feel doesn't always work out for every image, and then I'll kind of mess around with different color combos if I'm trying to go for a different look. And sometimes I don't like the way they affect the lightsaber, and so I just move the lightsabers up to the top, so that way they're kind of separate from all those light and color adjustments. So here's where I start getting into some of the brushes that I love. Photoshop has a ton of free brushes, or just Google like smoke brushes. So this smoke brush is one of my favorites. Like, it's a pretty standard design. And what I like doing is setting the flow to a low amount, and then I color pick a color on the saber, and then I put it around the saber to kind of add that extra light, not just for the saber, but also for like on the character, and it kind of looks like it's bleeding on there. And then I do this for like lasers or any other kind of lights that might come out in the image, most of the time, not for every shot. And then for spots where light isn't there, I kind of just put white, maybe black, or mix both to kind of just add like this atmosphere. And then I usually either decrease the opacity or change the blending mode. I kind of just mess around to see which looks the best. Also using like making multiple layers of that, like a copy of that layer, and then kind of mixing them. Sometimes I'll even put it behind the characters, but it's just a matter of messing around with it and seeing what you like the best. I don't like it to be too obvious most of the time. Like, I don't want it to be like, oh, there's fake smoke everywhere. Even like right here, it's like you can't really see it, but it's there. And it just depends on the image and what you're going for. So this next step that I really like doing, and it's something I've been trying to do more recently, is making this gray layer. And it's going to be a 50% like solid gray. I set it to linear light, and I'm going to be dodging and burning, which is going to be like making parts brighter or making parts darker. And so you're pretty much kind of just painting on like parts that are highlighted, parts that you might want to show darker. And so I feel like this is really powerful with toy photography, because sometimes it's hard to paint those light shapes that you might see normally, but with this it just really helps emphasize those little details. So I try not to overdo this, but especially for a lot of like the faces and certain things, like I think it adds like a ton, and it's so easy to do and mess around with. So I have this blending mode set to linear light, and you can see it's kind of like bright right now, but I'm gonna be decreasing that and decreasing the opacity later. I kind of like to do this just to show like, hey, this is where I'm marking, and then we'll fix it later on. So I try to do it to where like the light's pointing from, like here on Vader, like hit the saber side. So I'm gonna highlight some of that on that side. Mace Windu, I'm highlighting on his right where the saber is, and that's where I have my light coming to. So you can already see like some natural highlights on his bald head, but I want to kind of bring those out a little bit, and then after this I'm gonna go with the burn and make the shadows and just kind of create this shape, or like help create the shape of him. Also burning in on some of these like wrinkles of the clothes or the robes, especially some of those plastic rubber robes. Like, it really helps bring out some of that detail, and I think it's really awesome. And here you can see I decrease the opacity a little bit, and like 30%, sometimes it's even less, like up to 15%. So that way it's not too out there and obvious. And I don't always do this right away, but it is nice to make a duplicate. So I kind of like everything that's there on that image. So making a duplicate is like, this is a whole new set, a whole new canvas. So here I am going to add a lookup table or a LUT, which I talked about in the previous editing video. And what these do is change colors from certain thing, from one color to another. And because they're really popular in videos and video editing, and I do a lot of that. So I have a ton of my own, but Photoshop has some built-in LUTs that are really good, and I use some of them. And so one of the favorite ones is film stock, which adds a nice contrast. And this one is like another like kind of cinematic LUT that I add on too. And I don't always use them at 100%. I also blend them like with soft light blending option, and then decrease that opacity as well. Just like, I don't want it to dominate the image. I'm just kind of going for like little color shifts here and there. So lookup tables are pretty powerful. And so here again, I'm just messing with some of the exposures just to kind of see like if I add or change anything, like will it make the image look cooler? Like once again, I don't have a set method of, you know, this, and this. I use what Photoshop has and just see what's cool, what I like or what I don't. Here I am adding some more effects to the sabers. This is a cool technique to make the saber look a little more real and like fancy. It's adding a lens flare. So it's under the filter and render, and then click lens flare. And so you can add this to like a lot of different things for your shots, like off the helmets or whatever, but putting it at the base of the saber blade kind of gives it that transition from white to the color, and it's really cool. So I try to use it if I remember a lot, because it's a cool effect. And so what I'm doing is I'm applying it on the saber layer, not like the whole image. So if I were to combine the image and apply the lens flare to the saber, it's gonna like have the flare across the whole image. So here it's just contained to that saber part. And then here, once again, I have some more brushes, and I haven't done this a lot, but I do like the effect, and it's kind of like a over exaggeration of the lens flare and all that. So it's another brush, but it's shaped like a lens flare. And this one, I'm just trying to see which is a good size. So I kind of put that on top of the lens flare filter that we put on. And when it comes to these brushes, I usually use whites just because I feel like white's like a shiny, neutral, bright color. So that's what I do, or that's what I did here. I added that to both of them. And I kind of added a teeny bit of blur to it just to make sure it's not too sharp and it kind of blends in with the image. And the last step that I do is I flatten the whole image. So all the layers combine into one, make a copy. And then I do a high pass filter, just set at 2 pixels. So it really adds details to all the edges. And then I change the blending mode to linear light, but then I decrease the opacity a ton. And then once again, I just kind of play with it. See, like I don't want it too bright. Sometimes I don't want it too sharp. And sometimes I'll even mask out certain parts of that high pass just because I don't want it too sharp. But like, you know, faces, some of the details of the armor, that's cool to have really sharp. And then we have the exports, which I post all my work to Instagram. So sometimes I'll save a full quality image with whatever the pixels of the canvas are. But for Instagram, I always export at the width of 1080. And then depending on how I cropped it, it'll adjust the height to match. So this is supposed to be the maximum quality for Instagram. So I saved it, and there you go. you have any questions over any of this editing, please let me know in the comments, and I will catch you in the next one. Peace.